G'day and welcome to Media Tech Talk. I'm David Richards. In part one of our conversation with Mangrove Digital's director Tim Armstrong, we explored his journey from a dairy farm in rural New Zealand to helping shape some of Australia's leading media, data and advertising technology businesses. In this episode, we now turn our attention to the future, from digital audio and the connected car, to audience-first advertising, and to the rise of agentic AI and autonomous media buying systems. Tim believes we're entering a world where advertisers care less about channels and more about audiences, and where technology increasingly makes decisions on our behalf. So here's the question. Could the next great advertising platform be sitting in your driveway right now? We pick up the conversation with Paul.
I guess just on the audio side of things, like it's a really, in my opinion, unique skill set and experience that you have there in that space. And I think, you know, when we caught up not too long ago, when you were talking about the radio stations, the cold radio stations, which it was something that when you brought it up, it's like, yeah, that actually totally makes sense. But I'd never actually thought about it that much before in terms of that role in the audio environment. And you know, having worked at Woolworths when I was 16 years old, I remember the days when, you know, it wasn't Christmas until you hear those Christmas songs come on the radio at Woolworths. What are some other things about kind of the audio industry that have kind of people may not necessarily know or understand or think about besides, you know, something like that?
Yeah, it's a good question because when I came out of Switch Media, which was right around COVID, I had an opportunity actually to go to Spain to work for Luckett and TV, and unfortunately that offer came through in March. It was April of 2020, and various government restrictions kind of prevented that from happening. And in part though, I was still lucky to do a bit of work with them in 2020 where we launched a bunch of fast channels. But when the opportunity came up at Nova, I at that time probably wasn't so keen to go back into a media business. And it took a lot of conversation with Fired Tommy, who was the guy who hired me in there, before I kind of went, okay, let's go in. And part of the attractiveness was the fact that there was all of these commonalities between broadcast television and broadcast radio. And I knew that there was a lot of common ground, but I also knew there was a lot of nuances and differences. So I always refer to it as same but different. And I would say that, look, audio for the unaware or those who haven't experienced it is very grey, especially from a digital audio point of view. So if you think about the BVOD players here, if you want to consume a piece of video content for 9Now, you have to go through a 9Now registration gate to get that content. And that's the only place that you can access it. And even within a gated environment, that content is very, very locked down. Audio is more ubiquitous in nature. So it's more about taking the audio to where the listener is. So even though you've got ARN who works with iHeartRadio in this market, or that's their sort of forefront brand from a digital point of view, obviously SEA have built Listener, Nine have their applications for 3AW and the stations that sit, or Tapped Media, now it is, under the Laundry Group, and then Nova had the Nova Player. So digital audio is broken into two parts: digital streaming, which is basically the digitized version of the broadcast radio output, but not 100% of that listening is done on a platform that you own and operate. A good percentage is, because of the strong platforms that each of the networks have built. There's also an industry aggregator radio app, which is more for your listeners who like to jump between stations. And then you've got a few third parties on the side. And the reality with audio is that if you wanted to create your own audio application, you could probably code one on Claude tonight, scrape the internet, pull out all the free radio streams globally, put them into your application, would pull all the metadata, and you could have your own music application. And the good thing about that for the publishers themselves, because the first thing you go, well, I don't want my content consumed off platform, but if it is, I want to monetize it, you still monetize it. So if Nova Entertainment distributes Nova 969 digital station and it goes to a third-party aggregator like TuneIn, Nova still 100% monetizes that content. And then you flip to the podcasting side, where I would say greater than 90% of all podcasts are consumed across Spotify, Apple, Google. Big tech players who are aggregators, who have systems based on critical mass of audience. Everyone used to talk about content being king, and it is, but distribution, such as what Spotify's got or Netflix has got, is King Kong, because the audience is there and you can put more and more in front of them, and we can pretty much see what Netflix is going to do longer term just through the moves they're making already. So podcasting is really context driven. You don't get a lot of first party data, and then you're trying to patch together various data signals in deterministic probabilistic ways to try and match that together. Radio is also still very fiercely local and brand based. So even early days in Nova, the Nova FM people weren't necessarily talking that much or collaborating much with the Smooth FM people, because everyone was brand diehards. And the radio industry is still split down into your metro regions, and you've got your regional stations, and you've got your DAB pluses. So it's still relatively regulated in terms of licensing. But it's yeah, I think it's a really interesting medium that has evolved digitally in the last few years, but in a way that traditional digital people aren't necessarily familiar with. We don't have hordes of first party data. You've got a fragmented ecosystem, black boxes. You've got full end-to-end technology stack, so a monolithic technology stack that does everything from CDN to broadcast stream catcher to podcast CMS through to SSP. So it's very nuanced, and it it takes a very different style of thinking to be able to deal with the ambiguity when you've got so much fragmentation, especially on the monetization side of things.
Yeah, I'm of the personal belief that audio hasn't, like we've seen audio have its heyday, obviously, but I think in a digital space, I have a personal feeling that it's about to have a rebirth, specifically around the personalization of ad content for people who are driving a car and they drive past McDonald's or a petrol station, and that ad is picked up by a geolocator and it's specifically targeting them with that ad as they drive past it. That's unique to audio. I don't think you can do that in a moving environment the way that audio can be consumed. I think that's a really strong powerhouse on influencing the consumer whilst they're on the road or on foot, kind of thing. So I think that's,
and the car is a really interesting topic, right? So if you think about TV and the rapid evolution from broadcast to digital there, that was driven a lot by the fact that, hey, it's time to get a new TV. Hey, this new TV is internet connected. All of a sudden, I'm a CTV watcher. Whereas you don't necessarily have that rapid transformation or evolution in the radio space. Our audiences, or the audiences in radio, are still pretty strong. They're not really experiencing the declines that we saw in TV or broadcast television. The car is now becoming very topical globally from a prominence point of view, especially as we see loads of new cars coming out in market and loads of new technology in those cars, electric cars and manufacturers coming into the fray. And it's kind of nearly become the OEM battle that you had with CTV about what operating system is going to be the consistent one, and how do we make sure there is commonality between them to support advertising, to not fragment the ecosystem. And you've seen groups out of Europe, such as Radio Ready, where broadcasters across the European region, Australia is part of that now. South Africa has just joined it, where it's all of a sudden is, how do we preserve radio listening in the car? But more importantly, as you say, David, how do we capitalize on the new capabilities that in-car radio listening brings for advertisers and listeners? Because it is important for many people
Yeah.
to have the radio in the car. It's just, making sure that the vehicle manufacturers see the value in it as well, because at times they can be like, well, radio doesn't sell the car.
No. No, you're right. And I think also the handover or the handoff as well, as that user hops out of the car, they might be listening to something as a podcast, if you like, on their car audio, and they put their headphones in and continue that journey as they leave the car in store, then pick up the GPS location at their in store and all of a sudden start playing ads that are specifically or unique to them. That's pretty standard in today's world, but I think that handoff process would be really fascinating to see how that evolves.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Do you think the typically we see the fragmentation be a bit of a disadvantage in a lot of instances in the technology world? Do you think the kind of more open source nature of audio, along with the fact that we have things like VAST standards to enable more universal kind of communication protocols, makes it actually a bit of an advantage for the audio space?
Oh. Yeah. This is.
You stumped him.
I think I look at it this way, right?
Yeah.
It's very easy to come into audio and benchmark everything off what video can do. And in that process, it's also very easy to overlook the different style of engagement that exists in audio versus video, right? So, for example, when was the last time someone told you about sitting down with their mates to listen to a podcast together? Doesn't happen. You probably haven't heard it, or if you have, it's very, very, very rarely, right? So there's this really interesting engagement piece. I think commercially, if you analyzed BVOD CPMs versus digital audio CPMs, there's night and day between the two, and that obviously goes in favor of BVOD. But then if you go back to say, hey, the audio listening experience is more intimate and you're more engaged, then there's kind of a mismatch there. The technologies, I would say, audio technologies out there, generally, if you're an audio publisher, you're either using the Triton full stack solution or you're using the AdsWizz full stack solution, or at least a connection of technologies that are built to work together.
Is Triton, who's bigger? Because I see Triton pop up a lot.
It depends on market. So the US, I would say Triton. In Europe, I would say AdsWizz. But they've also got that really interesting ownership structure where they're both owned by media businesses. So, and we obviously saw that in video, right, where RTL brought SpotX, and then a few years later they decided SpotX was a stronger platform by itself, so they sold it back off. You had the big telco or business in AT&T that brought Xandr or Nexus. Then you had Newstar or Nexstar, which brought Liquid, the old video ad server, and all of those ended up diverging after acquisition, right? Because the platforms were stronger on their own. So it is really interesting how they have different success in different markets. But it's also can be interesting to go through the process of going, well, hey, I use Triton as a platform, but you're owned by iHeart, and iHeart could be in the market, like in this market, if you are a network that's not ARN and you're using Triton, then it's technically semi-owned by a competitor that you have in the same market. But ultimately, I think that when I look at audio technology, it's built for a walled garden environment, but it's used in a fragmented ecosystem. Whereas and then I look at video and say, hey, video is a walled garden environment, but it's built on a fragmented tech stack or a Frankenstack, because you have very, very few full end-to-end video platforms these days. You have something more composable. So I do see a world longer term where I think there is feasibility in having audio video in a single trading approach, because of that common VAST protocol. You don't necessarily get around some of the challenges of which version of VAST are you on, and how do we make sure they're all backward compatible or compatible with each other. But but there's just a bit of work to do because of the difference of the consumption environments around measurement, and what that looks like. But ultimately, we've seen SCA and Seven West Media come together through an acquisition. You have to be excited about the opportunity there of what they could build with the assets that they have, and if they can make that work, it becomes really interesting for the media landscape, I think.
You're absolutely right, and I think going back to the free TV, the Future of TV Advertising event a couple of months ago, the guys from Southern Cross 7 were talking about the acquisition of Southern Cross and how it's opened up a whole new local market for them because of the footprint and the relationships that the radio networks have, and obviously the regional TV stations as well. My view is that radio stations tend to have more of a local touch with the community and the businesses that they operate in, whereas TV, because of the cost, obviously, to some point, it's hard for them to get down to that small, lower level. They just wouldn't get the return on their investment from content distribution or publication, etc. So that's a significant step for a big network to look at the smaller community and the opportunities that the local advertiser can provide. The radio has given them a platform to get into.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's definitely a lot of untapped opportunity in those regional areas, and it is like the salesperson in those areas for those regional stations still has their little black notebook with all of their contacts in it, and they're relationship focused, and they make it easy for the buyer, but there's still just a lot of unserviced SMBs out there who still opt for Google and Facebook and Meta and all of those platforms through ease of access. And you've obviously seen Nine Ad Manager, where that strategy was sort of somewhat focused around how do I not target this at SMBs who are already buying, but target at SMBs who aren't buying in terms of incrementality. And is there an option? How do I give this buying platform as a tool to the direct salespeople so they can still maintain the relationships? The ease of executing a campaign just becomes more streamlined and more simple.
Yeah.
So I guess just to continuing on a comment you just made, do you kind of see audio and video continuing to kind of merge together in a lot of instances? I mean, I think about this podcast, for example, we are a video first podcast, but it's released across all three major platforms. You can consume it in either mode, audio or video, depending on what you're doing at that point in time. I mean, even if you think about like radio stations, I mean, realistically speaking, these guys are recording video a lot of the time as they're doing these episodes. So why not broadcast that, right? People would find that interesting to an extent. Is that something that you kind of would see happening in the future?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's driven by the change we're starting to see in people buyers becoming less focused on the channel and more focused on the audience, and becoming a little bit more honed in on, hey, you know what? I actually don't necessarily care too much where the audience is coming from, as long as I can get to them. And the audio and video, in the audio world, we talk a lot about winning the occasion, which sort of talks about across a 7-day week, what are the occasions where someone might choose to listen or view. And if you can combine audio and video, then you generally have more opportunities to reach someone. And if you can standardize the way that you measure, buy, measure, and execute that, then it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, there's got to be some parity on the commercial side of things from a value of inventory point of view. But I think longer term, we will get to the point where, if we start to talk about Agentic and some of the AdCP stuff and those kind of things and how we use agents, I think at the end of the day, it'll be, hey, I want this female 20 to 30 audience, and I'm going to go out and find it for you. And it just turns out that we've got 4 or 5 different channels where those audiences exist. And then the focus becomes more around cross-channel frequency management and measurement and that. So it drives efficiency in one area, creates new opportunities or things to solve in another area. But I think everyone if we don't simplify that buying process and drive a focus around buying audiences, um, we run the risk of starving some publishers and continue to contract that middle where all of those media publishers sit.
Yeah, it's a nice segue. Let's head into the future of innovation with agentic advertising, because these episodes aren't AI focused, but they tend to have a good element of AI in them. We're hearing a lot about the agentic AI and systems that don't just assist people, but actually take action across workflows and platforms. Where is Mangrove Digital sitting in the AI and agentic piece, and how complex is it for you guys?
Yeah, look, we're definitely leading conversations with chat about AI and agentic.
Mm.
It's kind of part of our philosophy that we want to take a very horizon style thinking to our customers, because ultimately we want to take them on a journey. So those conversations are important to them because that's part of their role often in taking that and feeding that back to the executive or back to the board, and having those conversations at a business level. And I think it helps everyone if there's a good level of framing and information around those conversations as well, because I feel like what we have seen in some cases is um, because of the proliferation of access to AI, the non some of the non-technical people have had greater success in selling in AI initiatives than the technical people, because the technical people are kind of worried about how it works, and the AI people are the non-technical people are super excited about what it can do. Um, and and I think that in doing that, that has kind of at times eroded that relationship internally between the technical teams and the non-technical teams. But I think where we try to utilize it and talk to AI is about the art of what's possible. And we feel like the trend at the moment is that so many businesses are so busy doing operational day-to-day stuff, they just don't get the time, the space, the capacity to think about long-term strategies. And a lot of what they think about in terms of AI is very, 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 very tactical, or very, very, very AI for the sake of AI. And there was a very interesting article out of a guy in New Zealand last year, which he really coined AI is a solution looking for a problem.
Mm.
But we do find with our clients that, yeah, a lot of them, their intent is in the right area. How do we do things faster? How do we better manage our costs? How do we drive efficiency? How do we remove some of the low level work and automate that in the background? Um, and we're very fortunate that where we often land in those conversations from a what does a potential engagement look like is the readiness piece. Where is your data? How is it structured? How are you set up? Are you in the right position to capitalize on AI? Because we also want to make sure that if we enter into a project with them, that there are clear commercial outcomes or clear outcomes that can be established in and around that project. Because one, we want to make sure we deliver what we say we'll deliver, and two, we want them to get what they believe that they will get from that conversation as well. So I think there's still a little bit of a what AI can do and the maturity of a business in terms of closing the gap between that, and we think that's where we are offering a lot of value, is trying to close that gap. We don't want people to not think about AI. We want them just to be a bit more aware of how they get to AI off the back of it. And then obviously it's been pretty interesting, all of the news that come off the back of Possible in and around, Omnicom with AdCP based agents up and running, and some of the stuff
Mm.
happening there. And I think we always think about when the market is operating best is when the tech vendors and the clients are kind of operating lockstep, where their levels of maturity are increasing at the same time. Um, and if it's, one of the things we run into a little bit is um, if some brands in a sector are doing AI and some brands aren't, and let's talk about media as an example, if some agencies are doing it, some agencies aren't, does that topple the current distribution of investment out to the various publishers, and disadvantage those who aren't as far down the AI journey as the others? And then is there a risk around homogenization, where if an agent is booking a campaign, it goes to the same supply source every time. And instead of being, let's say, 4 radio networks, instead of each of them getting a share of revenue that reflects their audience, then one of them gets the whole budget, and they get the whole budget all of the
Yeah,
time.
that's an awesome point. And that's like, just really digging into this. Like, I love AdCP, and the fact that it's only been around really for 7 months as a standard in the advertising space for Agentic, I think is really fascinating. It's helping the rate of adoption that we're seeing. But we still don't know or understand its complexity in where things could go wrong. I think just what you've just said then, if something, how do you manage it so that the agents are actually fairly distributing campaigns across buyers, across the sellers, so that the publishers are looking at the revenue opportunities and the right product. But if something goes wrong, then the decision could be made that it goes somewhere else. And where's the insight and oversight in that? I'm sure there is. I just haven't dug into it enough to understand it properly. But really curious to see in that space.
Yeah, it's we kind of look at it in 3 layers, right? If you build an AI capability, it's in 3 layers. You've got your foundations, which is where all your data sits, and all your sources that feed into what you want to do. Then you have your intelligence layer, which really is where all your business rules and your logic sit. And then you've got your interface, or your front end, or your activation layer. One project that we have done in and around something that was built from an AI point of view, we were very fortunate to get the opportunity to sort of come and stress test it. But what was very evident was the complexity and the rate at which that grows in that intelligence layer. And it's a case of like, well, hang on, we've discovered something today, we need to add another business rule. And then we need to add another business rule, and then you start to then have to go, well, how do I check that my business rules aren't impacting or conflicting other business rules? And then how do I govern that long term and check that? How do I try to account for such a wide range of use cases and long tail use cases to try to make sure that if I offer this access to someone who maybe sits outside my organization, that we aren't at risk of it derailing itself? Because if you think of your experience with platforms like Claude, Claude can fall on its sword as soon as you tell it it's done something wrong. And then you start to go, okay, so was what you told me before correct, or was it not correct? How did you get there? Am I wrong? Who's right? How do we figure this one out? And I don't know whether, we probably don't quite see any return rationale coming too much from the likes of Claude just yet, or arguments or counter arguments. But it kind of, you only know what you know, and it could be dangerous. And I think in general, it's a little bit like wealth across the world, where I think when it comes, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And I think with AI as a tool, the smart people get smarter, and those who aren't as educated or don't have the knowledge end up with less knowledge longer term.
I think it's an interesting point, the kind of what you're just making around the stress testing side of things and adding the business rules, or having to kind of layer in these additional business rules and changes. In my own experience, building out workflows, automated workflows and agents to just solve some of my own personal business challenges, because kind of focused on doing that first and making sure that, the things that I'm building solid over a long period of time. And what I'm finding is, these agents that I built, they work good for a few days, and then over time, as they start to build up more of a history, you come up with all these little nuanced problems that they run into over time, and then you start to kind of troubleshoot and debug and break it down. Okay, why did that one issue happen? And then you figure it out, and then you kind of like, okay, now we need to add all these business rules just to solve that one little nuanced problem. And it's like a massive paragraph of business rules you got to add just to solve that one little nuance. And you keep doing that over time. And like you say, I think it just creates a bit of a complexity problem. There's a lot of conversations in market around how we solve that issue of, when agents and things grow to a certain level of complexity, the amount of risk in terms of the accuracy kind of seems to grow kind of exponentially. And so how do we re-architect these agents in a way that kind of reduces that risk?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
So I guess looking back, covered a lot of ground today in a lot of different areas. If you could go back and meet yourself at the start of your digital career, what advice would you give to that young Tim Armstrong?
And you can't say don't meet David Richards at MI9. That's off the books.
Yeah, don't approve that campaign that David wanted back in 2011.
Exactly.
No, I think for me it's. I think back then it would have been about, the advice I would give myself would be about, regardless of how advanced technology-wise the workforce or the industry gets, people will always be the heart of it. And I think that, and that goes back to early lessons for me in my career around building relationships, managing those relationships, fostering those relationships, having the right level of emotional intelligence around how we communicate. And I think, that would be my advice to myself. I've where I am now, and going into Mangrove, I've put a lot of focus on celebrating wins, because I think in the running at 1,000,000 miles an hour in a media business, we're not great at celebrating wins. And you also, if you don't celebrate your wins, others aren't going to either. So I think, for me, it's just about people and relationships. And I was a introvert by nature, but I now love nothing more than going to a conference like IBC in Amsterdam, NAB in Las Vegas, to Mexico and Germany. Been fortunate to go to some really cool conferences and just leave those after clocking up 100,000 steps and having no voice left at the end of them. And it's lots of conversation, not about work, about life and about things, and it naturally evolves into talking about what's possible and getting to know people beyond their work persona.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Tim, it's come to that time. Thank you so much. Director at Mangrove Digital. It's a good journey. Been, as I said, fascinated to see you evolve over the years. And it's also great to hear about your journey in digital media. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been really amazing. And to everyone else watching and listening to us both here in Australia and across the globe, thank you so much for joining us as well. We look forward to seeing you next time here on Media Tech Talk. Coming up next on Media Tech Talk, Pubstack founder Hervé Brunet believes the ad tech industry has been approaching a major challenge the wrong way. In fact, he says,
we stopped fixing it. We found a different way that is way more effective, and we use way more signals than what's available in the bitstream anyway.
So here's the question. Why has Pubstack stopped trying to fix signal loss, and what is the alternative approach they believe could deliver better outcomes for publishers, SSPs, and advertisers? That's next on Media Tech Talk.